Public preaching, how has it impacted me? Two ways. First of all, public preaching is a flesh killer. You might get up in some fine cathedral somewhere and wax eloquently and have everybody in that cathedral think you're the greatest thing since Charles Spurgeon. That's not going to happen to you standing out in the middle of a street. I have had people do things to me that in the end, the whole world is looking at you as a clown. And it is a great way to see your flesh just crumble up and die. I remember one of the first times I had been saved, and it was a couple of weeks later, and I saw a guy handing out tracts, and I went and asked the guy who had led me to the Lord, what is this all about? And I got some tracts, and I went out on the campus at the University of Texas, and I stood there and I started handing out tracts, and man, I mean, guys would make fun of me, girls would laugh and take the tracts and roll them up and throw them back at me, and it was such a process of seeing God just destroy, the flesh. And so that's always a good thing. It's always a good thing. Secondly, it helps me in the sense that, we will, those of us who also preach in church buildings and travel and do conferences, we get to the point where we're living in a bubble. We're using all these theological terms and speaking in high Christian language and dealing with very important topics. And we forget the world doesn't have a clue. They do not understand sometimes our language, the need to start at the very beginning, the need to explain everything we say. When I was witnessing in Dublin the other night, and the young man, he kept asking me, but how do you know the Bible is true? And I gave him sort of, many, classical arguments. And then he said, but I just don't understand. How did God write it in heaven? And did it float down? And all of a sudden I realized, this young man was so far, I wasn't coming close enough to him. I wasn't answering the basic questions that he really needed to hear. I mean, he was at ground zero. He knew more about anything than the gospel. And so it made me think once again, look at your culture. Where are they? Where do you have to start with them? And that helps me when I'm also preaching in a church.